Welcome, everybody, to the meeting for Florida Veterans for Common Sense. So with no further ado, Cody, take it away, my friend.
Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Betty Ahrens from the Union of Concerned Scientists as our speaker tonight. Betty's the campaign manager of the Food and Environment Center. Her program's goal is to transform our food and agricultural system into one that is more equitable and more sustainable. Betty leads the team's outreach activities and advocates for policy changes at all three levels, local, state, and national. Prior to joining Union of Concerned Scientists, Betty was vice president for outreach and partnerships at Every Voice, where she drove the organization's efforts to elevate money in politics, the analysis of money in politics, and solutions within the broader progressive and social justice communities. Before that, Betty was the executive director of Iowa Citizens Action Network, where she managed the Iowa Health Care for America Now campaign and directed several successful nonpartisan voter engagement campaigns. Betty has a BS in psychology and also a JD from the University of Iowa. Please join me in giving Betty a warm welcome.
Hello. It is truly my pleasure to be here. I wish I could be there in person, and I'm ready for the collard greens and the kayaks and the parade next week and everything. It sounds great. So I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity to speak with you today. So Cody said most of what I was going to start with, which is a little bit about myself. But as he said, I'm the campaign manager at the Food and Environment Program. I've been here at UCS for 5 years, which is the lifespan of our current farm bill, which actually just expired. Before that, I worked in the democracy field. And before that, when I was with the Iowa Citizen Action Network, we worked on a whole broad range of issues, everything from healthcare to renewable energy to voter registration, just a wee bit on agriculture. And so all that is to say that before UCS, I knew vaguely what the Farm Bill did. I mean, we've all heard of it, but I didn't really understand its scope and its impact and how much it affects every single person living in the United States. So I'll start out by giving you just a little background on what the Farm Bill is. The first thing to know is that it is huge. Over the course of the 5 years of the Farm Bill, it costs about $500 billion with a T dollars. So it's a very, very large program. It was originally passed in the 1930s as part of the New Deal in response to the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl and the disaster that brought to agriculture nearly 100 years ago. Its goal initially, and it's still these are still its goals, is to keep food prices fair for both farmers and consumers, to ensure an adequate food supply, and to protect and sustain the country's vital natural resources, which were, of course, devastated by the Dust Bowl, which was caused by farming practices that were not sustainable. So the Farm Bill is basically a package of legislation. It's passed roughly every 5 years. And as I said, it has a huge impact on all Americans. It impacts how food is grown, what food is grown. Its programs cover such an enormous variety of things, everything from crop insurance for farmers in case there's a natural disaster, healthy food access for low-income families. It's where we get money for the SNAP, or food stamps as it used to be known. It provides training for new farmers. It provides support for farmers who want to do more sustainable agriculture practices. And, I could go on and on. I mean, it sets the whole stage for the food and farm systems. So every 5 years, it expires, and then it goes through this very long process to update it. I'm going to get into that in a little bit more about what that entails, so you can see where we're at now and what opportunities we have. But ultimately, the committees propose, Senate and House each have agriculture committees. They introduce a bill. That bill then, after it goes through committee, it's can be amended. Eventually, it's passed by both the House and Senate. And then they go to conference to reconcile those two differences. Eventually, they pass a bill. It is then signed by the president. That's the process. The current Farm Bill was enacted. It's called the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. It was enacted into law in December of 2018, and it expired about a week ago, which, is really kind of shocking in a way. They usually come in late, but never quite as behind as they are now. And I'll get into that in a bit. The good news is, even though it has expired, not much changes right now. The funding that funds all of these programs I just talked about, that's already been approved and is in existing budget. So not much is going to happen until the start of the calendar year in January. And that's where we run into problems. And so at that point, if there's not a Farm Bill, they will have to do something. They'll have to probably enact an extension. Could be a 3-month extension, could be a year extension. This would be unprecedented. That's not happened before. If I get out my crystal ball, I'm guessing it is going to have to be an extension, because they're so far behind this year. But in the meantime, this delay gives us more opportunity to influence what goes into the next Farm Bill. Neither the House or Senate has finished writing the initial draft of the Farm Bill they'll introduce, and so we get a chance to impact what the final bill, what the draft proposers are going to say. So let me just back up a little bit and talk about what the Farm Bill covers. And I'm not going to cover everything, because the Farm Bill actually has 12 titles. A title is like an area of focus. And if y'all want to talk about what all the different titles are, maybe in the Q&A, you can ask me about different ones. But I will mention 2 titles, just because I will get to that in a little bit. And those 2 titles are pretty important. The first title is what is called the commodities title. And this covers the income and price supports that for farmers who grow commodities. And that's corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, sugar. I think dairy is included in there. These are basically your non-perishable, long-term storage, big crops. The monoculture, I'm from Iowa, the corn, soybean fields that go on and on for acres and acres. So Title I covers the price supports that go to the farmers who grow those commodity products. It doesn't cover things like fruits and vegetables. Title II covers conservation. And those are the programs that help farmers implement natural resource conservation efforts so that they can have more sustainable practice on their cropland or their pasture land or their it even covers forests in some cases, forests that can be converted if they really should be forests instead of farmland. Title II can help farmers move that into being set aside for timber instead of being cropland. So that's just a little bit about what's in it. And then backing up a little bit more about how we get to where we are now. I don't know how much folks know what a marker bill is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a few marker bills. So I'll just take a second to define what that is. It's basically a bill that is introduced in Congress, and it's not meant to pass on itself. It's meant to introduce policy ideas and gather support for it. And it's usually marker bills are around a big omnibus bill like the Farm Bill. So for the last several years, there have been all of these marker bills introduced that they're creating language and they're gathering support around various ideas. various policy practices. So one of the things that we at UCS want to do now is it probably is obvious, being so large, the Farm Bill is not something that our little staff can do everything on. So what we do is we prioritize, and probably our biggest priority this year, we have two big priorities. The first one is we want to make the Farm Bill a climate bill. Now, as you might know, a lot of agriculture creates a lot of greenhouse gases. And in fact, in the US, 10% of greenhouse gases come from agriculture. And I don't think that even includes things like food waste or transportation of food. So that's a pretty big chunk of greenhouse gases come from agriculture. The other kind of flip side to that is farmers are really at the front lines in terms of what happens with climate change. They're the ones who are impacted by the floods and the droughts and the heat waves. And so, there's a lot that could be done. Certain farming practices, they're kind of broadly known as sustainable farming. They will lower the carbon impact of farming and have a lot of added benefits as well. One of them might be of interest to you folks in Florida, which is a lot of climate smart agriculture also leads to cleaner water coming off the farms. So it's much less polluted. As you probably know, the dead zone is almost entirely a product of the runoff from farms in my home state of Iowa and other Corn Belt states. If we have sustainable farming practices, it not only is going to help us on climate, it's going to lead to cleaner water. It also helps farmers be more resilient to climate change. If you have a very healthy soil, it's able to hold more water. And that's actually good in both floods and in droughts. It's better in floods because the water doesn't just run off. It's able to absorb that water. And because it's able to absorb that water, it's also better for drought conditions. So there's huge benefits to sustainable agriculture. And so that's why we have supported and actually helped to draft the Agricultural Resilience Act. And this is a very large, ambitious bill that is all about conservation in agriculture. So I'll get into, I think at some point as I go along, I'm not going to take too long because I want to get to Q&A, but I will give you some links that might be able to tell you a little bit more about the Agricultural Resilience Act and what you could do to help support that and make that a part of the Farm Bill. A second priority of ours is making the food and farm system more just and equitable. Black farmers in particular have really been the victims of a lot of discriminatory practices in the farming system. 100 years ago, Black farmers made up about 15% of all farms in the United States. And today that's 2%. It's been decimated. That is almost entirely due to two factors. One is discriminatory practices at the USDA that were in effect for decades and decades. And only recently have there been improvements. I mean, I don't know if y'all have heard of Pig for 1 and Pig for 2, but there were enormous lawsuits suing the USDA for their discriminatory practices. And the other thing that's led to such a huge amount of Black farm loss is there have been entirely legal land grabs by private speculators and developers who use the fact that a lot of Black farmland has been held in heirs property. And that just means it's been passed down through the generations without a will. So you can have farmland that could be owned by hundreds and hundreds of people, and a developer can come in and force a partition sale, or if just one person agrees to it, and all the land has to be sold, and then it's used for development. My mother lives in South Carolina, where she retired to, and when she retired there like 15 years ago, it was just kind of in the middle of nowhere, and now it's unbelievably highly developed, and a lot of the development in rapidly growing areas. She's outside of Hilton Head. has been through land taken from heirs property owners. So another thing we're supporting is the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which will help Black farmers and other farmers as well with things like helping to clear heirs property. Heirs property is not just Black farmers by any means. It's a lot of farms in Appalachia. It's a lot of farms held by Native American communities as well. And then finally, the other thing we want to do to make the system more just and equitable is help out the people who work in the food and farm system, the farm workers and folks in the processing plants. One of the marker bills we're supporting is the Protecting American Meat Workers Act. And then there's other laws that we're working to support that won't be in the Farm Bill because they're covered by the Labor Department. But those are, big picture, some of what our priorities are this year. Okay, I don't want to talk too long, but let me talk a little bit about some of the opportunities we have right now. Probably the most important thing at this moment is protecting funding that was passed last year in the Inflation Reduction Act. In that huge bill, one of the many things it did on climate, did an unbelievable amount of things to help the climate. But one of those things was it put $20 billion into climate-focused agriculture funding. And so this is things like helping farmers make that transition from traditional agriculture to sustainable agriculture. I was talking to a friend of mine at the farmer's market on Saturday, and he was telling me, we just got to talking. It was a really rainy day, no customers around. And he was telling me that one of the things that he did recently is he wanted to use cover crops, but he had to get something for his tractor that allowed him to drill into the soil to plant the seeds instead of like scattering. And, it's things like that this $20 billion helps farmers make that transition because it's expensive. And if they're able to do that, most of these farmers, they want to be good stewards. This gives them an opportunity to, to do that. Let's see. So where we're at with this $20 billion is that we want to see it protected by being put into the Farm Bill, into the Farm Bill funding. Unfortunately, there are some folks in Congress that want to either eliminate that $20 billion investment or they want to repurpose it. And as you remember, when I talked about Title I and Title II, they want to take that $20 billion and instead of having it for conservation, they want to put it into Title I, which is providing the price supports for commodity growers, for the corn and soybean growers. So what we're working really hard right now to do is to get folks to get a hold of Congress. When I stop talking, I am going to put a link in, asking their members of Congress to protect that climate-focused funding in the Farm Bill. The other thing we're hoping to do around that is get people that are, maybe a little more willing to go a little further to write a letter to the editor, excuse me, or maybe even an op-ed and talk about, educate your neighbors in your community about how important that is. I mean, I would think from a Floridian's perspective, you probably care about, for example, the dead zone. And even though the IRA funding, the Inflation Reduction Act funding of $20 billion, even though it isn't for dead zone, it's eliminating the dead zone is one of the things that would be helped by having more climate smart agriculture. So if folks want to do that, maybe you can talk to Cody or whoever and let me know, because we'd absolutely love to have some folks help out with that. Now, in terms of your members of Congress, neither Senators Marco Rubio or Rick Scott are on the Agriculture Committee. I don't think. I should double check that. But before we got on, I did look and see there are two members of the House who are on the Agriculture Committees. That's Darren Soto in Florida 9, which I think is pretty much, I think it's straight east of Sarasota. It's somewhere in like central Florida. And then Kamak, and that's in northern Florida. So I don't know if you're a statewide organization. I know you're in Sarasota, but if anybody is in either 3 or 9, that would be particularly helpful to get a hold of those members of Congress, because they're the ones working on this, writing this farm bill. Well, partly because my throat is a bit dry and I've been talking a long time. So why don't I pause here? And if anybody has any questions, I'd love to hear them. I will, if I can take a minute, get this a link to do an action alert around the agricultural resilience. I'm sorry, about the protecting the funding, the $20 billion in conservation funding. And if anybody wants to follow that link, that will take you to our website at UCS, where you can use a form on there to write a letter to your member of Congress. Let's see, I'll put it in the chat. There you go. The other thing I can put in the chat, just in case you're interested, is this is our general action page, and there's some more information on there and more actions that you can take around the Agricultural Resilience Act and the Justice for Black Farmers Act. We have action alerts on there for both of those pieces of legislation. And while you're on, I got my C in there, but while you're on there, feel free to look around. We've got a ton of information on our website about the Farm Bill in general and agriculture and the whole food system. So I think I'll leave it at that. Is there any other issues that you all are interested in hearing more about, or any questions, or is there anything I've said that you are confused? I covered a lot of territory, so I'd be happy to help clarify anything that's not clear.
What members of the Florida delegation, if you know, are helpful or harmful?
Well, if you're going to talk to your member of Congress, I really think the most important thing right now is that $20 billion in funding, because the thing I would say about that conservation funding is there are conservation programs right now, the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP it's called, or EQIP, I don't know what that stands for. And these are programs that provide grants to farmers to do these things. Every single year, there are far more farmers who apply for this funding than there's money for. There is so much demand. Farmers want to do this, but they don't have the money to do it. This $20 billion is huge. It is by far the biggest investment in climate smart agriculture we've ever seen. It's enormous. And if we can get that in the Farm Bill, this is going to, because it'll be in there for 5 years, this is going to have an impact for decades going forward. And so that's the most important thing. And that first link I put in there, that will send you to our site. It'll give you a little more information. And I can also, or Archie, who's sorry he can't be here today, but we can also follow up with some more materials if if you want to distribute those. So that's the most important thing I would say. And then, on the Justice for Black Farmers Act, I think there are pieces of that are going to pass. Probably the one that has the best chance that we need to work on making sure is in there is working on clearing up heirs property. This has been, a huge problem for Black landowners. It's not just farmers. It's people who, it's people who own land of all types. A lot of it's in timberland, actually. And So protecting heirs property, I think, is another priority. There's, I'm trying to think what else. The Protecting American Meat Workers Act. These folks that work in these chicken processing and pork processing plants, some of the work they do is incredibly dangerous. They were hit so hard by the COVID pandemic, and now that the industry is recovered, there are all these attempts to increase line speeds and things like that. We really want to make sure that those line speeds aren't increased. It leads to many more injuries and danger for the people working in those poultry and pork meat packing plants, and beef as well. Yeah, there's a lot there, but those are the priorities I would identify. I know you folks are interested a lot in environmental work, and so conservation funding is the way to go. I think it's the most important thing right now.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tom Meehan. Yes, I do have a question. You mentioned $20 billion, and my question is, given the whole overview of farming in the United States, what portion is done by the corporations? What portion is done by the family farmers?
Yeah, great question. Really, I appreciate that. So actually, the vast majority of farms in the United States are privately held. They're for the most part, they're not held by corporations. Doesn't mean they're not agribusiness. I mean, you can have a privately held farm that you can call it a family farm, but it might have, 3,000 acres of corn and soybeans, or 5,000 or 10,000 acres of wheat. Part of the problem we have with agriculture in this country is consolidation, and more small and medium-sized farmers are being bought up by these large farms, but they are privately held for the most part. There are some corporate holdings, but for the most part, they're privately held. But the farm crisis of the 80s, I remember it. I had just moved to Iowa to go to college in 1983, and Iowa was devastated by the farm crisis. And the result of that was so many farmers lost their livelihood. They couldn't support it. And so the handful that were able to really go big bought up all those farms. And so we have far fewer farmers now than we used to. And that's part of the problem. One of the things that the Farm Bill helps to do, and this is another lower priority, but one we're pushing as well, is to try to help some of these new and beginning farmers. There's a lot of people who want to get into agriculture, but it's hard to get into because land is expensive. So giving new young farmers, veteran farmers, women farmers, farmers from immigrant communities, Black farmers, Indigenous farmers, giving those folks the opportunity to get loans to buy land, would be a big improvement. And there is some evidence that some of these smaller farms have more sustainable practices.
All right, thank you.
And I saw there was a question in the chat or in the Q&A of the Florida legislators on this committee. So I think I answered that, but I will just restate it just in case. So obviously, your senators, Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, we should contact them whether or not they're on the committee, but I should check and see if they are. On the House side, Darren Soto, Florida 9, and Kat Kamak, Florida 3, are both on the Agriculture Committee. So those would be top priorities to reach out to if you're a member of those districts. But even if you're not, let them know what you think.
I hate to keep on taking over the meeting, but anyhow, one of the other hats I wear is that I am the co-chair of the Minnesota Food Action Council, which is the Food Security Council for both Manatee and Sarasota County. We're working on a lot of different projects. One of the things we're pinpointing is how do we open up markets for small and beginning farmers. Because right now, corporate farmers are basically controlling over 80% of the federal food dollar. And so we're working with the extension to open up and create incubator systems so that we can create small farmers. Another thing I'm working on is EBT farmers markets in underserved communities run by people in public housing. That would give those communities an opportunity to control the food that they eat. 80% of the dollars federal food dollars that we have go to national food chains like Publix and stuff like that. And 20% of it, the other 20% goes to party stores that used to be grocery stores in those communities. And now they're party stores and giving out snacks and high sodium food. And so we're working to try to develop EBT farmers markets to capture those EBT dollars. And the other thing we're working on with the help with Blue Cross and especially me with Humana is food is medicine. Yep. That's a big area. And we're working with the food waste. 47% of the food that we produce goes to some kind of waste. So we try to put that back into the system, into enterprises, and also looking at the thing about food is medicine. 80% of the healthcare that we suffer is food related, food inducted illnesses. So we're trying to take some of the food waste and create what we call food is medicine. And originally, food was medicine until we got into the synthetic stuff that we're taking now. Those are the items. And by the way, Debbie Stabenow, you know Debbie, who's the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, she's a friend of mine.
All right. Okay, I'll tell our lobbyist that Gene says hi. Or not Gene, I'm sorry. That's what your name says there, but you're not Gene. But yeah, no, those are great programs. And we actually want to see an expansion of the Food is Medicine program. There's a thing called Food RX where you can actually, get a prescription to buy fresh fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, that's the point that we're working on. How do we get those where the food will go directly to the people that's homebound and working with the hospital, so that those food will come from the field directly to those people who are homebound.
Yeah, and the EBT on farmers markets, just fabulous idea. I'm glad they're doing that, and we need to keep that going. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the floor? Cheryl?
Well, hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. And I helped with correspondence and living on a farm and watching the water and the soil and everything. Put together some things with correspondence to Senator Brown. We got cover crops into place.
Good.
And funding for the farmers to get the cover crops in place, cost shares with seeds and labor.
Yep.
Which benefited me as well. Also, there's the EQUIP program, which helped with the transition to organic, and that was the first farm bill that organics was mentioned in. Again, we used that for seeds and for cost share for seeds and our labor. We also put in the windbreaks and grass waterways, riparian areas, restored wetlands. We did all that stuff at the farm and got the Environmental Stewardship Award for our county for 2011.
That's great.
Yeah, and the pond no longer ran to cover the color of the fields. After the first planting. Just
isn't that amazing?
One friggin' year, and it was done. So thank you for your continued work, and I'll get back in there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I love that you brought up the water. I worked with a farmer in Iowa last year who actually measured the amount of nitrates that was coming off of his farm after he put in cover crops was cleaner than it was upstream. So the water coming off his farm was cleaner than where it was going into. So he fed into a stream that ended up going into the Mississippi, like all farms in Iowa do. And that water coming off his farm was cleaner than the stream.
Oh,
so yeah, it's amazing.
I was at Lake Erie watershed, but yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And it's farmers like you that really tell the story of the impacts that this funding has. And this is, as you, I'm sure know, there's a lot of farmers that want to do this, but there isn't enough money. And that's why we need this $20 billion in conservation funding.
Oh, good. Well, you got my support.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And you also have the support of this group. And for those people that don't know in the audience, that young man at the bottom that you see at the bottom of the screen, that's Cody Keller. And Cody is one of our hardest working members, and he heads up the environmental working group.
All right.
And so I'm sure we can get together with Cody, and we can draft a couple of position letters on behalf of our organization. Cody, you think we can get that done?
Yeah, certainly. And we can also take all the information that Betty shared with us and get it out to our members so that they can go ping on the people in Congress, and especially the ones on the committee, about these marker bills that we want passed now that we understand why they're so important.
Thank you very much. I will follow up, not just with these alerts I put in the chat, but with some other materials as well. And if we can get your support with your members of Congress, that would be a huge help. I appreciate it.
And for those of you that are new, this type of thing is one thing that our group is known for. We pride ourselves on being an active group. We just don't talk. We do things. And so these posters show the microforests that we planted to combat climate change. I mean, we've got 7 of them in the ground now, and I defy you to find another group, environmental group or anybody else that can accomplish something like that. And a good part of that accomplishment is due to that man right there, Michael Burns. So Betty, we want to thank you very much. It was a very informative talk, and we've got some work to do now. You've kind of, we kind of look at it as marching orders. And so Cody's our fearless leader, and we'll get it done.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed meeting all of you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right, I'll sign off then. Bye-bye.
And before we adjourn, I'd just like to remind everybody, do take a look at the posters, because we'll be using those at some of the tabling we'll be doing later this fall. And also look on the table, and every member should have one of those stickers at least. If you don't have a bumper sticker, at least get a sticker of our group so that that's on your car. And you can just pick them up right there. And again, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to volunteer and work on a project, and there's plenty to do, send me an email, and we'll try to slot you in a place that you're comfortable with, where we can get more work done. We do an awful lot, but we can do a lot more. So are there any other announcements for the group? Jack, anything you want to bring up? Or
partnering with Solar United Neighbors, and there's an opportunity right now in Sarasota and Charlotte County. If you have any interest at all in solar, you can sign up and learn more about it. No commitment until you actually sign a contract from the installer. So if you sign up and get information, you will at least have some idea about what it would cost you. And there's going to be an information session on October 24th online. That's a Zoom session so that you could learn more about the solar co-op. I used the solar co-op to buy my solar and battery, and it was almost half of what the commercial price would have been. So you get much better pricing. And then the next day on the 24th, on Zoom, and I have some little handouts that you can take with you and scan if anybody's interested. And on the 25th in Venice at the Waterford community, there will be a live, again, information meeting, and you'll be able to talk to folks there, including the installer will be there. And the folks that have signed up, 60 people, have said they're interested in buying solar, and they have selected, they get to select the actual installer and who gives them the best deal, and they selected Optimus solar installers. So if anybody wants we have a code that you can scan if you're interested in attending any of this.
If no further announcements, with that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.